lot of them, and a lot of them try to do this kind of thing, where they have a series of combinations of characters and overlapping capabilities that somehow create synergies beyond the sum of its parts. And I think, you know, while there's no shortage of them, I think Chrono Trigger stands alone, maybe even, at the very, very top of the heap in that regard. So great point by Sonic Rose. Good thing to point out there, I think. Jofo mentioned something that was also very popular, and the idea that it really is open to anyone. I can't emphasize this enough either, guys. Chrono Trigger really does appeal to people that are not gamers. And if you want to test my principle on that, I'm not necessarily talking about, you know, your grandmother, right? That's a different experience altogether. But anybody that has been accustomed to great storytelling in terms of films and TV, people that kind of get engrossed in things in general, I think are going to like this game. If they are someone that appreciates good interactive or good experiences in cinema, good experience in film, good experiences in television, then I think they're really going to enjoy Chrono Trigger, and they don't necessarily at all have to be gamers. That is a key accomplishment, and very, very difficult to do, specifically for an RPG. This was the glory day of RPGs, by the way, on the Super Nintendo. It was right at the end of the Super Nintendo's life. So in many ways, it was kind of it stuck right in the middle of the end of the era of the Super Nintendo JRPG, the 16-bit JRPG, and what was to come, which was for a while actually kind of a crap fest of trying to figure out how to translate that experience into 3D in the 32-bit era. And I think at the end of the day, one of the reasons that Chrono Trigger has the benefit of being where it is because it is so open, it is so easy to get into, and it is so fun for people that don't, you know, necessarily play a lot of games. So it's a very important part of the whole experience, and I couldn't agree more. Mog mentioned something that I think really does speak to the brilliance of this game. And that is that it's not just that it has a lot of cool features and factors. There's a ton of games out there, guys, that have maybe a cool gimmick, a great mechanic, a cool character, maybe a great storyline, great music, you know, a particular sequence or level that's awesome. But very few games balance all of those things together to create such an incredible, balanced, and tight system that is fun to play. Mog points out that it is the balancing of all of these aspects that make Chrono Trigger so awesome. Couldn't agree more. I think that is a big, big part of it. It isn't just the fact that the characters are engaging, the storyline's cool, that the music just kind of grabs you and pulls you into the game, that there is an experience to be had in terms of the open world, in terms of the, I think, very well implemented battle system that doesn't get nearly as tired in many places as other JRPGs. I think the balancing of all those things together is very, very important, and I think it really is a key aspect of what sets this game apart and why Chrono Trigger is awesome. Marquis talked about the fact that this is a gateway RPG. This Piggy Tales, off of Jofo's comment about it being open to everyone. Here's what I'll say about that. I think if you want to get someone to play JRPGs, the first game you give them, or even RPGs in general, and we had several conversations about that I thought were very, very interesting, by the way. And I want to compliment several of you out there for talking. It doesn't really pertain to the question of this week, which is why I'm not talking about them, but I want you to trust me in that I read every word of it. I think it's a tremendous argument that you guys, or discussion you guys were having about how we really this speaks to how we categorize RPGs. And I think there are cool questions to be asked about future weekly ringers that I want to ask specifically about that. I've written them down, and I'm going to ask about them in the future. So thank you for that. I want to compliment you guys on that conversation. But if you're going to turn people onto RPGs in general, I think the first game that you expose people to is not Final Fantasy VII, it's not Final Fantasy VI, it is Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger is not the most complicated and difficult game in the universe. In fact, many of you complain that it's way too easy. It's not maybe the most engrossing story you're ever going to find out there, but it is very, very fun, and it does kind of bring you in. You do want to affect the universe, and you want to save the universe, which in the end is kind of important if you want to jump into this game. The characters might not be the best characterizations in the world, but they are damn good. And of all the things that come together, I think it is such a balanced product, as we talked about. It becomes a gateway RPG. People will play it and they'll say, man, this is a cool concept. I need to play more of these things. And then you bring them on to several of any of the other kind of RPGs that you want to jump into. This is a gateway RPG. And I think it is a part of what makes Chrono Trigger so awesome. Not just the fact that everybody can play it, but the fact that it leads everybody to really enjoy this kind of genre. And if you're going to bring people into it, this is, par excellence, in my mind, representative of the golden age of the JRPG. There is nothing that is quintessentially more of a JRPG of this era than Chrono Trigger. So if you're going to bring people in, then there you go. Cobaltium talked about the idea of pioneering the open world concept. Welcome back to you, by the way, Cobaltium. Or should I say Commander Cobalt? Anyway, absolutely 100% agree with this concept. This game, yes, it still follows a very linear progression in terms of your storyline. There's not a lot of ways that you can mess with the degree in which the story progresses. You can't. But here's something you can do. You absolutely positively can explore this game in ways that I don't think was really available to any, especially JRPG, before, and has really become a staple of many games since, and that is the open world sandbox of really do whatever you want to do. I think what happens at the same time with a company like Bethesda is that they take that idea to the extreme, even though, as I think Maze pointed out, even something like Daggerfall, which is tremendously huge and has unbelievable amounts of depth in terms of where you can go and what you can do, at the end of the day, the storyline remains, it's kind of an illusion of a sandbox, which I think in many ways is the same kind of thing you see with Chrono Trigger. It's a little bit of an illusion of a sandbox, but they're flirting with the idea. It's one of the first games to really do this, and I think it does it very well. You forward, your thought is, well, what if I go to this place at this time, and then find out if it's available? You end up traveling there, and next thing you know, you've found a new item because of your ingenuity. You've discovered a new, sequence that your characters can go through. Whatever the case might be, folks, that all the combinations of places and all the locations of times and your capability and freedom of movement to really move between all of them is, I think, spectacular and something that was never duplicated, especially on the NES. I'm sorry, the SNES, but even forward into the 32-bit, realm, where you have something like Final Fantasy VII that really embraces very strongly the concept and the open world nature of Chrono Trigger, and something that I think doesn't get copied very well moving forward. I think it is a big part of what makes this game awesome. Mr. K, tied up in a nice bow, exactly the thoughts of all of us, which is that the music of Chrono Trigger is one of the best soundtracks of all time. There's no question about that. I don't think any of you that have listened to the soundtrack of this game or have played this game at any length would say that the music is a hindrance to this game. It is one of the things that makes it amazing. Every once in a while, there is a masterpiece of this kind, and this game represents, I think, not necessarily the peak form, even for the JRPG, which I think happens more along the lines of, Chrono Cross, the quasi-sequel to Chrono Trigger, which I think the music is even better, because at that point, one of the great things about being in a CD system is you really can embrace the digital nature of sound, the full-blown instrumental recording capabilities that you can demonstrate inside of a PlayStation with CD quality music versus through a sound processor chip in previous generational systems like the SNES. The music in this game is quite simply awesome and does things that I think you will very rarely find in a 16-bit game. It is, as I would say, almost universally good. There are very few tracks that become, I would say, repetitive and boring, or even annoying. The battle theme does wear on me more than a lot of games do, but the music in general is just awesome. It so well complements the style and the art of this game that I think, also many of you talked about that as well, and that is that there is a style to this video game. Make no mistake, there is even though it's 16-bit graphics, right? You're looking at beauty, and I think the peak, the apex of the form of artistry that the Super Nintendo generation was capable of. You're seeing it in Chrono Trigger, and it is something that has been replicated now with the kind of renaissance of the two-dimension side scrollers and the kind of 16-bit era graphics that have been kind of brought back into style with contemporary games, indie games, and the like. You're seeing that style get really, I guess, emulated elsewhere. The music complements that so incredibly well. You will never find a game with more introspective, more kind of relaxing, but still more really very engrossing and engaging music. The way that the music complements the style is something you do not normally find inside games. That is reserved for some of the very best names, which, I mean, there's no question. There are plenty of amazing composers. Nobuo Uematsu actually, it's debated how much work he actually did on this game, but finished the soundtrack to this game. So in many ways, you have two of the legends of video game soundtracks working together on the same soundtrack, or at least complementing each other's capabilities there. And I think that really shows in terms of the beauty and the overall packaging of this game. So I challenge you to find another game that does that as well, but outside of maybe Final Fantasy VI on the Super Nintendo. It just doesn't happen. So I think saying something about the music and the style is very, very important. Physics of video games is going to finish us off today with the idea of, this is something very important, and the reason why I even asked this question bears, I think, some origin in this concept, and that is that people that know video games still talk about Chrono Trigger 20 years later. That is very, very important, okay? So the idea that we don't talk about a lot of the games that were on Super Nintendo, and if you that were out there as a part of the marathon saw a lot of games you probably didn't even realize existed for Super Nintendo. But they did, and we don't talk about those games. The only time that anybody even talks about them is kind of in, you know, dark places where Super Nintendo is still kind of, you know, the ruler of the roost, and they're kind of living in the past. That's the only time they talk about those games. Very, very few games survive that kind of test of time, and the reason why is because they are, I think, timeless. It is indicative of their timelessness. And in that regard, Chrono Trigger is still being talked about. It is still one of those games that is absolutely, fundamentally undeniable and is still out there. Go, as I said, go to a video game website, go to your favorite forum, go to a convention about video games, and start talking about Chrono Trigger, and everyone in the room will light up and start talking about it. And the people that haven't played it will start to feel left out, because everyone else that knows anything about video games has played it, is playing it, and continues to revere it for what it is, whether they got into gaming 5 years ago or 25 years ago. That is important. The fact that people are still talking about it is a reason why it is so awesome. And I think those things kind of reflect on each other and build the legend of this video game. So, folks, those are your thoughts. Obviously, there were a lot more than that, but I just wanted to give you, as I always do, the greatest hits. Let me jump into a couple other things that I want to mention. One is, I don't think it's deniable that this game is a work of art. It is a masterpiece. It is one of the best examples, if not the best example, of what the Super Nintendo is capable of and what the generation of the Super Nintendo was capable of doing. In that regard, I think many of the things that you guys talked about are important as to why. Excuse me. But I will say that for my money, in terms of what is important to me, several of the things we've already talked about are important, but what is the most, if I had to eliminate it down to one particular idea that really showed me what I like about this particular game and why I think it's indicative of the genre, It is because it is the kind of the perfect package. I'm going to agree with the idea that it is the perfect package. It comes to